welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP, and you're going to get 10% off your order. With that code FNP at simbody.com, you're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
You know the guys from Fight Night Picks for their weekly UFC previews and predictions, live shows like Question Mark Kicks and the Sidekick. Thanks to your support, they're adding a new show to the channel. If you're an MMA fan, you're going to want to join in the action of Dana White's Contender series. So as they always say, let's get into it.
Boy, and just like that, we're back and we're set for Dana White's Contender Series week number 8 and week number 7. It definitely delivered 4 contracts on the line. Matt, the Allans went with the Bonfim brothers and we ended up getting it right. So Matt, you're back in the win column and things are moving on great. And listen, I see it out there in the chat. We'll start on a somber note. Raw Torque with the rest in peace to Elias Theodorou, a pioneer in Canadian MMA.
Extremely sad news.
Yeah, passed away at the age of 34 due to cancer. And just, you know, the MMA community is really weird and they can kind of go with one or two ways with a fighter, but Elias Theodorou wasn't just a ranked middleweight at a time. He was a ring boy. He was all over the internet. He was the gift king at one point. Well, he would respond to just about every single mention out there. He really was a positive force in the MMA space all the time.
He was, and it was nice to see all of the positive things that people had to say about him, all the nice people he had touched. I saw Michael Chiesa posted a video on Twitter about how, like, Elias Theodorou straight up gave him the shirt off his back once for a presentation. So just really nice to see all the positive things and all the ways Elias Theodorou was able to touch the MMA world.
And yeah, I mean, really tough. And you know, it's going to be tough for a lot of people moving forward through this week with that unfortunate news to start it off. But we got to try and bring some positivity into the show. I'm at Contender Series 2022. So as I mentioned last week, both Bonfins get a contract. Carl Williams comes in on a couple of weeks' notice, up a weight class, and he ends up getting a big-time win. He looked really good. And then in the main event, Petrino gets the win by finish. I mean, 2 knockout wins over Bellato.
Would you agree with me when I say week 8, though? It feels a bit lopsided in the card. It really does feel top-heavy talent-wise, to me at least. I feel like there's a few fighters, especially from those top 2 fights, that could easily make it into the UFC. Even some of the losers, if we're being completely honest. And just at the bottom end of the card, there might not be as competitive of fights. Or maybe I shouldn't say that. The fights themselves should be competitive. I just don't necessarily see the ceilings for some of these fighters.
Well, and I'm really eager to hear from the chat what you're thinking about a lot of these matchups. If you're watching it after the fact, just throw it down there in the comment section as per usual, because that's kind of how the show goes. There's a lot of people that tune in live on Monday night. There's some people that really try and cram quick on Tuesday, and that number goes way up, and that's where you can really hit up that comment section. But it does kind of feel like that throughout this week. Obviously, you can see Begosso on the left-hand side of your screen. On the right-hand side, Javid's brother Farid Basharat, who's competing on Contender Series this week, and Javid competes against Tony Gravely on Saturday. So, Matt, listen, I mean, Joe's talking about MMA judging, Christopher talking about close fights, this and that. But when we do look at this matchup, Matt, first fight on the card, I mean, I'll put the graphic up there right now so people can follow along after the fact and they know where we're going. Brandon Lewis, he's 6-1. He's going to be taking on David Marcos at 135 pounds. And it should be noted, everybody on the card this week made weight. That's a really important thing because some of the early weeks, couple of weight misses, a giant weight miss, and we'll get to it in the main event. But when we do look at this one, Matt, couple of lower level guys in the bantamweight division. And I don't mean that in necessarily a negative tone, but when you do look at it, let's just focus on Cruz Marcos. 12-0 as a pro, 6-0 as an amateur. that stuff's great, but he hasn't fought since 2019, and he's breezing through the competition he's facing, but it's on the Peruvian regional scene, and we've seen Peruvian fighters make a dent in the UFC. Claudio Poyas made it to the finale of an Ultimate Fighter. He's on a really nice run right now, getting those crazy knee bar submissions, so Poyas is really doing it, but he was really young when he was on that regional scene, and then he made the jump to the States, so I did see it kind of out there on Marcos. I think it was on his Facebook page. He had posted the Dana White's Contender Series little previews, snippets that they give you before the fight. You can gain great intel on fighters if you watch that, whether it's in the fight or you can somehow find it before the fact. But he said that he moved to the States back in January, training at American Combat Gym, and in my brain I went, American Combat Gym, where the hell is that? I know that name. And then the next thing, he's hitting a pad, and who's holding that pad? Boston Strong, Charles Rosa. It's his gym. So Marco's been in the States training for quite some time, but he hasn't fought since 2019. Again, he did look really good in the fights that I saw, but he was the champion of a promotion I'd never heard of before, 300 Sparta. So what did you make of Marcos when you did the tape study?
He does remind you of a big fish in a small pond. He could be a very promising talent, and he could be a promising prospect if he is able to get past Contender Series. But we'll say this about sometimes when people make their UFC debut, or even on this show. It's kind of hard to know until you know, and I feel that way about both of these fighters in this fight. I feel like we're all going to get a much better idea about how both are going to look in the future based off this matchup, because I think it's pretty easy to say this is the hardest fight either guy will have been involved in up until this point. And for Marcos, he did look really good on the regional scene. I like his volume. I like how he's able to throw some combinations, not afraid to mix in a kick every now and then. But I just think Lewis is a slightly more refined version of everything that Marcos can do. They are very similar in that aspect, though.
Yeah, when you look at it for Brandon Lewis, like he struggled against Mo Miller on Contender Series last year, but Mo Miller was a pretty good prospect, and then Miller wins that fight, goes to the regional scene and loses to your guy, Jose Johnson, on Looking for a Fight. So for Lewis, it is interesting. I listened to an interview that he did with All Access MMA and James Lynch. I watched so many James Lynch interviews today. It's not even funny for the UFC card that's coming up. But he talked about the fact that, A, he's a big Marshall Inu coin guy. He's also taking this fight on about 5 weeks' notice, so he does have a little bit of, some time in. But when you look at his last fight with B2 Fighting Series, I went out and watched it, and it was kind of hard to find, but it was the main event. He missed weight at bantamweight, weighed in at 138. He fights Taylor Moore. James asked him, and I went on Topology, and it says he won due to shoulder injury. Boy, Matt, I don't know if you found that fight, but he beat the piss out of Taylor Moore for the entire fight. And at the end of it, it's a TKO. The referee calls it off due to a TKO because he just continues to pound away. And then after they get up, Moore's still holding his shoulder. So it says shoulder injury, but he beat him pillar to post. So I look at this fight, Matt. I think it's going to be, fairly close. It just depends on what version of Marcos do we get, because I know Lewis is pretty well-rounded, struggles a little bit with the takedown defense, but man, he throws with a lot of power. He throws really good combinations. I think it's just a very well-matched fight, hopefully, and I think it's going to be a fun fight to kick the night off.
Exactly. This could be a fight of the night style of fight. I just don't know if even the winner gets into the UFC. Maybe they get a developmental contract. Maybe they keep them around just to see how they turn out. But this should be an entertaining fight for as long as it lasts.
Should be a good one. So we move on, Matt, and again, you see Farid Basharat, you see Begosso. Our next fight is between Bruna, Brazil, representing, you guessed it, Brazil, and she's going to be taking on somebody who has the most aggressive nickname of this week. So last week in all of MMA, it was the guy who took on Jalton Almeida. It was the pleasure man, Anton Turkalj. This week we have the sawed-off savage, Marnic Mann, and she's got a lot of firepower on her Instagram. There's a lot of fighters this week, Contender Series and UFC, that just like posing with the old guns out there on their socials. But for Marnic Mann, out of Minnesota, or sorry, not Minnesota, Montana, I'll give her due. Not a lot of fighters that you see training and living in Montana. No. So out of Bozeman, she has a significant other that's involved in fighting. And if you do look at it for Mann, her grappling is very, very good. It's the hallmark of her game. Her takedowns, not the most orthodox. If you go watch her fight against Pauline Macias or Macias, that's one of those fights where
just lock up.
Pauline fought Gloria de Paula on Contender Series, and the big talking point was, well, you got a striker against such a very good grappler in Macias. And in that one, Macias is going for takedowns. Marnic isn't really able to land much of her striking. And then all of a sudden, off a takedown from the opponent, she's able to get the submission. She's won some decent fights. Hasn't really fought the biggest level competition. For Bruna, Brazil, like Dana White's Contender Series second half of 2022, you could just call it LFA / Dana White's Contender Series Brazil. So many fighters that took advantage of those Brazilian LFA cards this year. She did as well. Her striking really gotten her to the dance.
So crisp.
Takedown defense, not the best, but she likes to go for defensive submissions off of that and then somehow end up back on her feet to strike again. I found with Bruna Brasil, Matt, and we talked about all these different strikers that hold their hands at varying lengths. Kind of reminded me of like a Lyoto Machida or like an old-timey striker. 'Cause she keeps her hands like, you can't really see it, but now you can. Like right low down by her hips, but out like this. And she's always out there throwing kicks. My comp to Bruna Brasil, somebody that I found with a lot of volume, long, lanky for the division. Somebody like a Marina Rodriguez on Dana White's Contender Series. That was kind of the one that
I would
kept
agree with
coming
that.
back to.
I think Rodriguez might have a little bit more power. We just know a lot more about her, I guess. So maybe Brazil could develop into a talent like that. But this is a clash of styles. Again, these are the fights that keep Mike Goldberg up at night. He loves these. Because if Brazil's going to win, it is going to be a striking affair. She does throw really nice kicks, even though she does remind you of an old boxer from like the 1890s. She can throw in combinations. She has decent power shots. The thing I worry about with Brazil, though, is she is a kick-heavy fighter. And in this fight, I could see that helping Mann. We had quickly looked at the odds before we started filming, and Mann is a sizable underdog, I do believe, which I found
It's not that crazy.
Okay.
So Bruna Brasil opened minus 155. The line went right down automatically, minus 200. It's come right back up, minus 184 for Brazil, plus 151 for Mann, and the line continues to go towards Mann.
This is a poor way of describing it, but Brazil might be a better striker for striking's sake than Mann is grappling for grappling's sake. But the problem is, Brazil does throw a lot of kicks, and I think that is a good opportunity for Mann to catch one of those and make her turn into a grappler. Because like you said, Brazil won't immediately just pop back up to her feet. She will try to play around a little bit, work her own submissions, go for a sweep. And if Mann is just heavy enough on top to be probably one of the better grapplers Brazil's ever fought, then maybe she can just make use of it, win enough rounds, go out there, fight for the submissions. I think this is an interesting fight just because the two fighters are so different.
And Mann is 5 feet tall. Bruna Brasil's 5'6", and both of these women have experienced flyweight, strawweight. And I put in my notes like, flyweight taking this fight. They both fought at flyweight recently, so they're both coming down to strawweight, but no issues trying to make the weight. Raw Torque saying Mann is small. She's small, and when it comes to her striking, it's jab and then like run in for the takedown, or pawing her left hand and then run in for the takedown. One kick reset. There's not a lot of striking out of Mann, but the grappling is very good. So that really is the focal point of her game. And I will bring it back to Brazil Mann for one time. If you go to Bruna Brasil's Instagram, she has that video and it's like old, kind of grainy. And I thought, what the hell is this clicking on that? She scored a goal in soccer against the Brazilian women's national team. So feather in your cap. I scored at rugby sevens one time in university and nobody believes me, but if I had video evidence...
Not against the national team, though.
No, it was not. It was...
Not in a country known for soccer.
No, I was B team. But when we do get into our next fight, Matt, we have Malik Lewis taking on Trevor Peek. This is a big-time fight. This is a really exciting fight. Peek, his last time out, knocked out Kama Worthy. You know, the guy that, knocked out Devontae Smith in the UFC. Both of them no longer with the company. But for Peek... not the greatest level of competition whatsoever until he fights Kama Worthy. And going back and watching Peek's highlight tape, I don't know if you could draw up a comparable. It's kind of like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, more or less.
He reminds me a lot of Chaos Williams before he came to the UFC. It's a lot of big finishes over unknown names and guys who, let's be honest, they probably should have beat at that point in their career. But the fact that you're beating those people impressively should count for something, and that's the great thing about Peek. He can go into a fight, and if it does get into one of those brawls where it's one punch for one punch, he's got a pretty good chance of winning any of those fights. Just in this fight against Lewis, it's going to be really tough because Brandon Lewis is more well-rounded, I would say. I do think he has a better gas tank. Malik Lewis,
There's two Lewises on this card.
Malik Lewis, I do think he is a little bit more well-rounded in this matchup, and that's the thing. If he does play Peek's game, if he does decide, okay, I will strike on the feet, try to work my own combinations, it's just going to give Peek a better chance to win. But the thing is, if Lewis does go for the takedown, does try to work in the clinch, just wear on the power puncher, I think he can sap some of that energy and make this a less dangerous fight as it continues.
There's so many fighters that are on this card that have unbeaten amateur and professional records. I mean, you go back, Marnic Mann, she's 5-0 as a pro, but 4-0 as an amateur. You go up even further. Marcos, he was 12-0 as a pro, 6-0 as an amateur. In this matchup here, Lewis 7-0 as an amateur, 5-0 as a pro, so decent level of competition there. He did beat a guy who was 15-3 in Marcos Vinicius, but that was a really salty 15-3. He's a Peek fighting lightweight champ, and for Peek, Trevor Peek, he was taking his first fight since 2013 at lightweight against Kama Worthy. Making the weight there wasn't an issue. Making the weight this week wasn't an issue. But before, he was fighting at welterweight, and he had done some big things there in the past. So I think it's a fun fight. I agree with you here. I think Lewis is the more well-rounded fighter. We've just gotten to see a little bit more out of him. But for Peak, a lot of big finishes, and that's kind of, he does have a style that's tailor-made for Contender Series. Live and die by the sword, and that's how he fights.
100%. But that's going to make for a fun fight. Like, if he does win, he's probably going to get a contract off it, off entertainment value alone.
All right, Matt. So we go up to our co-main event of the evening, and we look at this fight. Last weekend's co-main event was 5 rounds between Khamzat Chimaev and Kevin Holland. This week's co-main event, we have Ikram Aliskerov taking on Mario Souza. And Matt, in this fight, everybody watching this show should be familiar with these two guys. And I say that with some confidence because for Souza, he's fought a very high level of competition that you know and you love. He's been featured 100%. On Contender Series twice already. And so, listen, third time's the charm. And if you're on Contender Series a third time, I'd say you win. They'll probably finally give you your due.
You would hope.
And he, again, hasn't fought an easy schedule. If you go down through it, he does have a couple of wins over guys he should have beaten. He loses on Contender Series 2021 against Chidi and Joe Kwani. Well, he's one half the co-main event this week in the UFC, or tentatively the co-main event right now, against Gregory Rodriguez. So Souza goes down and fights with Fight Music Show 1 early on this year, beats a man named Antonio Gordillo, and then he fights Sidney Araujo, who is 0-1 and knocks him out in a minute and 10 seconds. Well, I would hope.
Yeah.
And I held myself from swearing there. I would hope you beat a guy who's 0-1. That gets him back onto the show. Before that, he had a win over our fellow Canadian Marius on 2020's season of Contender Series. But they give him Ikram Aliskerov. And the reason I say all of this is because Aliskerov, his lone loss is against Khamzat Chimaev. I talked about Ikram Aliskerov on the show before because he's a Combat Sambo world champion a few times over. He's the international master of sports in Combat Sambo.
He's an international man of mystery for a second.
And he could be, but if you do look at it for Aliskerov, gets knocked out by that uppercut against Khamzat. Holy crow. Brace CF, he's doing the damn thing against a good level of competition. Takes a fight with Eagle FC down in Florida. Habib's promotion, gets a win there over Nishan Burrell. And if you look at it for Aliskerov, has 2 wins over UFC, competition or guys that have fought in the UFC. Nishan Burrell being one of them. And then I guess the other one was Dennis Talulin. He's got that finish win over Dennis Talulin, who did look pretty damn good this weekend against Jamie Pickett with the UFC. So Ikram Aliskerov is that guy. The only thing in this one is that Souza's fought a good level of competition, very good striker, suspect takedown defense, and Aliskerov is a massive favorite in this fight.
That's the thing. It's not that Souza's a bad fighter by any means. It's just his one path to victory is going to be canceled out because Ikram is such a good wrestler. And he's a good striker, too. It's not like he's going to be lost on the feet if he isn't able to get the takedown. He's not cut from the cloth of... Sarah McMahon's a fighter that we're going to talk about soon, I guess, so she comes to mind. Just a fighter, if they can't get that offensive takedown, they struggle because nothing else in their game really helps them go out there and win rounds. I think Ikram's going to be able to work his striking, work his grappling. I think we will see a decent amount of clinch, especially early on, just to sort of, again, try to take some of the explosiveness out of Souza. But once he does get it down to the mat, I expect it to be somewhat academic for Ikram.
Well, let us know in the comment section, let us know in the chat as well who you have in this matchup, because again, Souza is no slouch, and he's fought a good level of competition throughout, so it should be a really good matchup. I have talked about Ikram Aliskerov on the channel quite a bit in the past, so I'm really looking forward to this fight, and I think it's going to be a really good one. In that co-main event slot, you can see the two guys here, but for the sake of the people that are tuning in after the fact, so they know who we're talking about, I'll bring up the wording. But we have Allan Begosso taking on Farid Basharat, and Farid fights on Tuesday, Javid fights on Saturday, so works out pretty darn good for those brothers. And listen, there's a lot of brothers that are in the big dance. Obviously, the Bomb Films from last week, they really stand out. But I mean, there's the Kosi brothers as well. There were the Hughes, there was the Millers. There's so many different brother duos that have made it that far. But you look at this matchup, Farid Basharat has a lot of shine, and when you look at his brother, black belt in Taekwondo, is Javid Basharat. My one concern for Javid coming into the UFC was, who's he beaten? I mean, he did have that win over Oran Kalon on Dana White's Contender Series. That was pretty good. But facing Trevor Jones, I thought, geez, like the shine is really kind of worn off based on the guys that he fought on the regional scene. Farid's kind of the same way because he didn't really fight the greatest level of competition. but it's more or less the ways that he's beaten that competition, and that's kind of how I look at him going into this matchup.
And the one thing about Basharat, too, is he is such a good striker, but when you look at his record, a lot of the wins are coming by submission, and he does. He likes to hurt people and then work his grappling, and that's the great thing. His game is, and this might be somewhat controversial because I feel like people are really high on Shavkat Rakhmonov, but the best version of his game is somewhat similar to that. Hurt guys with your stand-up, work your submissions once you're on the mat. I would say Rakhmonov definitely has the better wrestling base. We've seen him go out there and power double legs. But you get the idea. Very high-level striking, very high-level submission games. And that's why I think Basharat... You wouldn't let a guy's fight get canceled on the first week of the show just to bring him back if you didn't think he was going to be pretty good. And that's the thing about Basharat. He was expecting to have his opportunity on week... It was the very first week, wasn't it?
It was, so first week he was supposed to take on Willian Souza. Basharat weighed in, what was it, like 136? His opponent weighed in 146. Full weight class bigger.
Which was awful.
He wanted to take the fight, but they said if it was 5 pounds over, they'd scratch it. So the commission scratched it and they brought him back.
But he is the much more technical guy in this matchup. Again, Begosso's not a bad fighter by any means. He does have insane power, and there are a few fights on this card that are, one guy's a little bit more skilled, but if the other one catches them, we'll see what happens. And this is very reminiscent of some of those other ones as well. I just like the overall game of Basharat. I think his brother was able to prove some of the question marks that we both had, honestly, about them coming into the UFC. But if his skill set is transferable, and if he is able to demonstrate in Contender Series, and then of course in the UFC, what he was able to demonstrate in the Contender Series, on the regional scene, I could see Basharat having a very successful career.
Well, you look at it for Begosso, he actually fought for the real McCoy, the LFA belt, lost that one by decision, but I went through his record, and I mean, 6 of 7 of his wins are by finish. He's got 6 of his 7 finish wins are in the first round. So he does get it done. He's not a guy that gets paid by the hour. But if it goes to a decision, he's not just going to completely deflate. So I do like that. And, I mean, when he was in that fight with LFA, loses the champion, ends up going over to Bellator. So it's not the worst thing in the world. So, Matt, I'll bring it back to that main page for just a second. And when we look at this one, Raw Torque saying, I'll take a flyer on Begosso. Joe saying Basharat's hype. I thought Javid might be, and then I got proven completely wrong in his fight against Trevor Jones. So I'm really looking forward to both brothers competing further. But when we focus in on this, Matt, our Contender Series previews are brought to you by One Pick. They're not brought to you by a sponsor. If you want to sponsor the show, by all means, let us know. But each with one pick. So, Matt, when you're going into this one, you get the confidence of last week with Bob Finn. You're trying to make a pick for this one. I hate to go with the giant juiced up favorite, but we'll see where it lands. Who are you going with?
So that's the thing. Last week I didn't want to pick the biggest favorite on the card, and I think I picked, it was what? Pick'em odds, I think?
Pick'em odds for...
So I've got an underdog, I've got pick'em odds, I'm doing all right with the underdogs. So I'm going to go against my own advice, basically. Here's the thing. I normally try to think who is the most UFC ready. That's a pretty easy way to figure out who's going to win this fight. I think Ikram is the most UFC ready on this card, I'll say that. But he's way too big of a favorite for me to pick in good conscience, so I'm going to say Farid Basharat. I know he's still a big favorite, don't get me wrong, but still, I like that half of the main event this week. I think he will be ready to join his brother in the big show. He does have very good striking from the outside, which should help him avoid some of the big power shots. And then if it does go to the mat, and if he is able to land some of those power shots, we know how deadly of a finisher he is, so I'm going to pick one of the Basharat brothers.
Yeah, and that's the really tricky thing for me, and I've said that since the first week. I completely agree with you. I want to go with somebody who's not a giant juiced up favorite. Last week I did. I ended up going with Gabriel Bonfin. He was around a 3-1 favorite in that matchup, but to me it just looked like he was so good. Why not go with him? Do I go with the guy that I've been talking about for a really long time, in Ikram Aliskerov, or are people going to be disappointed?
I just said I couldn't pick him in good conscience.
Are people going to be disappointed in me? I got to go with Ikram Aliskerov. Next week, I'll go with one that's closer than that. I'll give you 2. How about that? I'll give you 2.
You don't got to give us 2.
I'm going to go with Ikram Aliskerov and Bruna Brasil. I think both of them are going to win, and if I get them both right, it counts for 1 pick, and if I get one of the 2 wrong, I get a -1 in my column. How does that sound?
Why is it Bruna Brasil your pick, then?
Bruna Brasil's my pick against Mann, because I think in a matchup like this, Mann is so good on the ground, and Bruna Brasil can struggle against the takedown. I think the size advantage for Brazil is going to be big in this matchup. I don't necessarily love the striking out of Mann, and I do like the technical striking out of Bruna Brasil in this fight. So for me, I'm going to go with both of those 2 fighters, Brasil and Aliskerov, and if they both win, I get 1 right. If one of the 2 loses, I get 1 wrong. Does that sound fair?
Sure.
I like that one. All right, so that's the way we're going to go this week. We're going to switch it up completely. I've got Aliskerov and Brazil. Matt going with Farid Basharat. Let us know in the comments section once more who you have in this matchup, Matt. we have a big time show planned for this week as I have everything going on. We'll turn that down a little bit, but we have Corey Sandhagen taking on Sung Yadong. You're going to want to check out that full card video that we have coming out in the very near future. Some really high level fights on that card coming up this week.
There really is, and I couldn't be more excited for the main event. It reminds me a lot of like a Poirier, Dan Hooker type of a main event. Just one that you know is going to deliver no matter what. I don't really care who wins. I just know it's going to be a great fight between those guys. It could last 1 round, it could last 5 rounds. It could be on the feet, on the ground. Those guys are both incredibly talented fighters, and the winner could find themselves maybe not in a title shot, but probably in a title eliminator, I would say. If the winner of that ended up fighting Chito Vera or a Merab Dvalishvili, that would make for a great fight. So I think that's a really fun fight card.
Big time week of fights coming up this week. Contender Series on Tuesday, the big UFC card on Saturday, question mark kicks before that, as you always know. Share this video. Tell a friend about it. I mean, it's something that doesn't happen very often, but give it a go. And if you can't, just toss a like. Big time week in MMA. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.